Hi, it's Nicole, and I just realized when I came to edit what was supposed to be some reading updates, I only really had one clip talking about one book that I'm currently reading. So I wanted to provide a little bit of context for that because it was kind of filmed as though it was going to be in the context of having lots more clips of other reading updates to put together into one longer video. So I was reading Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, and I liked it. I liked the style of the writing. It was quite fun, and I loved that it was dealing with older protagonists who were like in their 70s and 80s. I really enjoyed getting snippets of their lives before they came to this retirement home and kind of seeing how that plays into their Thursday Murder Club. That said, for some reason it just wasn't fitting as well into my regular reading. Like I just wasn't picking it up as much, and I just wasn't staying as focused on the story as I'd have liked. I'm gonna just return that to my library, and I'll probably re-pick that up some other time to give that a proper go. And I have been dipping in and out of Grey Bees still, but I've noticed that I've slowed down a little bit with that, and I think it's partly because of the current political situation is feeling very close again to that kind of thing, and for some reason it's just making it a little bit harder for me to dip back into it. But I will probably keep picking away at that. I just think that it'll be slow going, not because of the book, but because of me and my current headspace. Other than that, I have continued to read Afropean, which is what I talk about in the clip that I'm going to play in just a second. At that point, I was only at 30% of the way in. Right now, I'm around 70% of the way in, and I think it's fantastic, and I would highly recommend it. I will talk more about that in my wrap-up probably, because I imagine I'm gonna finish that this week. But I just wanted to pop in here and give the next clip some framing. So the main one that I wanted to chat about is Afropean by Johny. And this book so far, I'm only 30% of the way in, but this book so far has been excellent. I think one of the things that gets left out of the conversation of blackness a lot of the time, or at least it feels like to me, is what that looks like from a European perspective. I think we hear a lot about the African American perspective, but again, like we don't want to synonymize that and that viewpoint with blackness more generally. Like that's a very that perspective is very specific to a nation, so that nation being the US. And I think what's interesting about the Afropean perspective, and again these will also be different from what it's like to be like black in South America or black in I don't know, Asia, and especially will be very different from being black in Africa. And I feel like I have to me it feels like a unique perspective in that I grew up in a majority black country, but I have a lot of links to the wider world that just isn't that. And the concept of Afropean really appeals to me personally, for a lot of reasons that maybe I'll get into like more as things go on, like as I continue reading this book. But one thing that I find really interesting about the idea of that identity is the fact that it's so nebulous, because I think the identities within that one identity come from so many different places. So where we have like African American, we have a shared identity, a shared history, really. That is a shared history of slavery in America, and a general treatment across an entire nation, and attitudes that are by and large the same. Whereas I think in Europe, the attitudes are a little different from country to country. And I think the influences are a little bit different, and the backstories of these groups of people who just form the one sort of nebulous identity of like black in Europe kind of thing, they're all so different. And I think because they're so different, they don't seem to come together and unify quite as neatly as it feels like African Americans do. So that alone has been really interesting, like seeing, so at this point, Johny has moved from talking a little bit about blackness within the UK to talking about blackness in France to talking about blackness in Belgium now is where we're at. And I think he goes to a few other places. I believe he goes to, or at least talks about, Russia, maybe Germany, something like that, which I think will be really interesting because I don't have as much information on those areas and being Black in those areas as I do with, for example, being Black in France or being Black in the UK. And something that's been really interesting about that to me as well is, I mean, I've always found it really interesting, the catch-22, or rather just the straight up hypocrisy of how France tends to handle race as this thing that doesn't exist, and yet it's like the ultimate colorblindness country. I remember hearing that the word race in French is kind of seen more as how we look at like breeds of dog almost. So you don't talk about humans as being like races, as if they have breeds, you know? And I loved the idea that we don't speak with that kind of language, that animalistic language towards people, but at the same time, that kind of ends up being just used as a way to avoid addressing racial discrimination. And that's, you know, the flip side of that is it's just really negative, obviously. And you do have huge discrimination in France, and you know, there are different strata of people, and that's not able to be addressed because legally the problem doesn't exist. And I just feel like the way that he addresses the issue feels not only like really fair, but also very compassionate, and also just really to the point, you know. I appreciate that. It's been a while since I've read anything with this kind of clarity of analysis, and I think the last thing that I can think of that immediately comes to mind in that vein is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which was an absolutely brilliant book and just happens to be by yet another Black British person. Maybe we should be reading more stuff from Black British people. All that to say, I'm really enjoying the book at the moment. It's one that is on my shelves, but I'm listening to it from the library. I can already highly recommend it, and I'm only 30% of the way in. But yeah, I think people need to read it, and I think it's so valuable having these brilliant analyses that are outside of just the African American perspective, like I said before. I'd also like to read a little bit more from European perspectives, specifically like non-English speaking European perspectives, because I still kind of like lump the UK in with Europe. Maybe that's just me being hopeful, but I think I want more books from the continent that I can read to get that perspective as well. I think I'd like to read any books that are, at least if it's in French, in the original French if possible, not just because I have a goal to read more in my second language, but also because I think sometimes things are missed, or sometimes things are omitted or changed in translation, which can be interesting as a side note, but I kind of want to be closer to the source material if possible. But I'm gonna just leave this here and maybe update a little bit more when I've got a little further into that. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment, and I'll catch back up with you later. That's really the only substantial reading update clip that I have, so I'll just leave this here and I'll see you again next time. Bye.